I don't understand. Oh. I'm only 34. Oh. How can this be happening to me? Oh. 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 Where am I? Was I hit by a concrete truck? Oh. Was it a confined space disaster?
Ready for chelation?
Who are you?
I'm the spirit of safe practices in lead abatement. You're suffering from excessive exposure to lead. I'm here to show you how you could have protected yourself. Now, follow me.
Hey! That's me!
Lead abatement, or working with lead, is extremely hazardous. Among today's victims are laborers and ironworkers who weld, burn, blast, demolish, and renovate structures painted with lead-based paint. Amounts of lead may be unintentionally ingested or inhaled while eating, drinking, or smoking on the job. This lead then accumulates in the blood, bones, and organs, causing damaging health effects, such as anemia, brain and nerve disorders, kidney problems, slower reflexes, impotence in men, and miscarriages in women.
If I had a second chance, what could have been done differently?
Well, Tom, I'll show you how a contractor with adequately trained workers abates lead. Follow me.
Engineering and work practice controls are methods that are required to protect workers whose exposure to lead is equal or greater than the permissible exposure limit. According to OSHA Standard 1926.62, the employer shall implement engineering and work practice controls, including administrative controls, to reduce and maintain employee exposure to lead to or below the permissible exposure limit to the extent that such controls are feasible. The permissible exposure limit, or PEL, is 50 micrograms of lead per cubic meter of air. This amount is comparable to 50 granules of sugar. To the naked eye, it may not appear to be much, but this is the highest average level of lead a worker can be exposed to during an 8-hour workday. Engineering controls are mechanical devices or systems which reduce or eliminate a hazard before it reaches a worker. Examples of engineering controls include ventilation systems, long-handled cutting torches, and tools outfitted with HEPA dust collection systems. Work practice controls are precautions taken by employees working with lead and include keeping the work area free of lead-contaminated debris, washing thoroughly before and after exposure to lead, inspecting and maintaining equipment, and wearing the appropriate respirator and protective clothing.
There's a lot more to learn, and I'll show you more. On we go.
Proper training of employees increases safety awareness to help them recognize exposure symptoms and get prompt medical attention. OSHA Standard 1926.62 requires the employer shall assure that each employee is trained in the following: the specific nature of the operations which could result in exposure to lead above the action level, the purpose, proper selection, fitting, use and limitations of respirators, the purpose and description of the medical surveillance program. Employers of workers exposed to lead above the action level are required to implement a medical monitoring and surveillance program. The action level is 30 micrograms of lead per cubic meter of air. This is the average level workers can be exposed to during an 8-hour work shift without using a respirator. The medical surveillance program determines the employee's current health status and the level of lead in their blood.
On a monthly basis, the workers are all brought up here to the office, and we conduct a monthly interview. Now, this is quite an extensive interview, which was drawn up by Mount Sinai to try to determine the effects of the various work that they're performing on their blood lead levels. It's very important to monitor blood lead levels, not just to make sure that the levels are kept below a certain range, but it's important to see what activities raise the levels and what activities lower the levels.
Medical surveillance includes a pre-placement exam that's given prior to workers being placed in a lead-exposed environment that is at or above the action level. This exam consists of blood sampling, a review of the worker's medical and work history, a physical examination, and a pulmonary function test. A pulmonary function test is one method used to evaluate the lung fitness of a worker and is required before any respiratory protection is issued. A physician's written opinion is then given to the employer and may only contain the results of the medical tests and general medical information relevant to lead work. This written opinion indicates whether or not an employee is capable of wearing a respirator and gives any limitations the worker may have with regard to lead abatement work. No other medical information should be contained in the report.
Medical surveillance is scheduled at a reasonable time and place and is provided at no cost to employees exposed to lead.
Wow, I never realized how much you needed to know. Show me more.
Tom, there's no reason to whisper. They can't see us or hear us.
Since working with lead is hazardous, it's important to wear the proper protective clothing and equipment during a lead abatement job. OSHA Standard 1926.62 states, where an employee is exposed to lead above the PEL, the employer shall provide at no cost to the employee and assure that the employee uses the appropriate protective work clothing and equipment. If these items are worn inside the work area, they must be labeled and disposed of as lead-contaminated waste. Personal protective clothing and equipment are worn to keep contaminating dust off the body and usually consists of reusable or disposable coveralls, foot and head covers, respiratory protection, and gloves if necessary. All PPE must be donned prior to entering the work area by following these basic steps. Remove and store street clothes and jewelry. Put on disposable undergarments and coveralls. These full-body coveralls go on over the worker's safety boots. Tape suit to the ankles. This reduces the chance of tripping and contamination. A belt is sometimes worn if the suit is too large or if the worker will be wearing a personal air monitoring device. Next, put gloves on and tape them to the suit. This keeps lead particles from entering the gloves and the suit. Inspect and don the respirator. Conduct a final positive and negative pressure fit check. Then place the head cover over the respirator's straps. A small strip of tape is placed across the top of the zipper to prevent it from slipping. In some cases, eye and hearing protection may also be required.
Hey, Spirit, tell me more about this respiratory protection.
Okay.
Respirators clean and filter the air breathed by the worker. The type of respirator worn depends upon the level of lead present in the work area and whether engineering controls and work practices are sufficient enough to reduce exposure. Respiratory protection programs are required under OSHA Standard 1926.62, stating that the employer shall provide at no cost to the employee and assure the use of respirators whenever an employee's exposure to lead exceeds the PEL. The employer must select a respirator appropriate for the level of contamination present in the work area and be among those approved by the Mine Safety and Health Administration and the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health.
Once it's determined that a worker is capable of wearing a respirator, he's given a respirator fit test. We provide 2 or 3 different types of respirators for comfort and to make sure that the respirator fits tightly around the face. It's not always possible to exclude lead by engineering controls or just avoidance, so it's very important that the respirator, as the second course of action, is an effective course of action.
Every respirator must undergo an initial fit test and again be tested every 6 months. One type of fit test is a qualitative or irritant smoke test. This test assures that the respirator properly fits to the wearer's face. The worker is exposed to a chemical agent while wearing the respirator. If the worker smells or tastes the chemical, the test must be administered again using a different respirator until the chemical is not detected. A respirator must also undergo a fit check before each use. A positive and negative fit check assures not only a proper face seal, but also ensures that the inhalation valves are working properly. Respirators provide significant protection if properly chosen, fitted, worn, cleaned, inspected, and maintained.
You mean to tell me that all I have to do to avoid lead contamination is to wear a respirator and personal protective equipment? That's all there is to it?
No, Tom. There's much more to it than that. Follow me.
Personal air monitors are devices worn by workers to measure the amount of lead in the air. OSHA Standard 1926.62 states, "The employer shall collect personal samples representative of a full shift, including at least one sample for each job classification in each work area, either for each shift or for the shift with the highest exposure level."
We try to make sure that the air monitoring is as representative as possible when we go to different areas of the bridge, because we understand, and the workers now understand, that different types of activities create different hazards. And consequently, we try to distribute the air monitoring to various people performing various types of tasks.
An industrial hygienist administers the personal air monitor test. The unit attaches to the worker's belt, and the cassette sampler gets draped over the shoulder. The cassette collects air particles during the worker's shift. The samples are then sent to a lab and analyzed for lead content.
With all the protective equipment worn by the workers, why does the contractor go through all that trouble to put a tarp around the work area?
Haven't you learned anything yet? Wash.
Lead is not only a health hazard, it also contaminates the environment. Containment structures are built to protect the environment by capturing hazardous particles or fumes associated with blasting or burning lead. Because the abated material is now contained, the airborne concentration of lead within the enclosure builds up. According to OSHA Standard 1926.62, when ventilation is used to control lead exposure, the employer shall evaluate the mechanical performance of the system in controlling exposure as necessary to maintain its effectiveness. Containment structures should include a ventilation system that increases the flow of clean air past the workers, reducing the concentration of lead and increasing visibility. Maintaining the affected area under negative pressure reduces the chance that lead dust will escape and contaminate areas outside the enclosure. All air must be cleaned or HEPA filtered prior to venting it to the outside.
You've shown me how properly trained workers dress and prepare the workplace. But how could I have done the work more safely?
I'll show you.
Removing lead-based paint incorporates several methods. According to OSHA Standard 1926.62, interim protection is required where lead-containing coatings or paint are present on structures when performing abrasive blasting, welding, cutting, and torch burning. Abrasive blasting sprays an abrasive material onto a surface at a high speed, removing the paint. Abrasive blasting machines must be equipped with a high-efficiency vacuum attachment or HEPA vac system. The configuration on the blasting heads must match the surface so the vacuum effectively contains the debris. A chemical stripping agent removes paint from areas where abrasive blasting cannot be used. Prepare the surface by scraping and removing all loose particles. Apply the chemical agent with a brush, roller, or spray gun in a uniformed manner. The chemical should be allowed to set for 24 hours on the surface before removing.
We presently have 12 laborers in a chemical stripping operation working from one side of the bridge to the other. And what we're trying to do is try to remove all of the lead from all of the areas that have to be either burned or actual connections are made between new steel and existing steel. So that when the iron worker gets there, we've got 70 to 80% of that lead removed from the bridge.
Power tools, more commonly referred to as pneumatic tools, should be used after abrasive blasting or chemical stripping. Vacuum sanders and needle guns are equipped with a shroud connected to a vacuum source, and the dust is then collected through a HEPA vac system. Removal techniques may vary depending on state regulations.
So now you know
Hey,
how to...
how about a lunch break?
Personal hygiene and other safe work practices are learned responses that require proper training. According to OSHA Standard 1926.62, the employer shall provide lunchroom facilities or eating areas for employees whose airborne exposure to lead is above the PEL. This area should be free of any lead dust contamination and readily accessible to employees. The employer must provide wash facilities where employees can remove their protective clothing and wash thoroughly prior to eating, drinking, or smoking.
Ugh, I don't think I'm hungry after all.
Hello, pay attention.
Remove dust and abrasive materials containing lead on a daily basis using vacuums equipped with HEPA filters. OSHA Standard 1926.62 requires cleanup of floors and other surfaces where lead accumulates shall, whenever possible, be cleaned by vacuuming or other methods that minimize the likelihood of lead becoming airborne. Materials identified as hazardous waste should be placed in drums and labeled for shipping to an approved landfill.
I've got to go.
No!
I have another construction worker to rescue.
But wait, what about my lead-contaminated clothing? I don't want to bring this lead home with me.
Ah, you have learned something.
The decontamination process is critical before leaving the workplace. OSHA Standard 1926.62 requires the employer shall assure that employees do not leave the workplace wearing any protective clothing or equipment that is required to be worn during the work shift. The employer shall provide shower facilities where feasible.
We find that many of the workers now have a high level of understanding, and they ask very important questions, such as, why am I washing my hands every day? Or why am I changing my clothes? Now, these are things that ordinarily one doesn't think about, but when you're not washing your hands, there's a possibility that you can be ingesting lead through your hands, especially at lunch and at breaks. When you don't change your clothes out of your protective clothing and into your street clothing, and when these clothes are not separated, you can be taking this lead home to your children.
To avoid cross-contamination, a decon station is comprised of two change areas: a dirty locker room where employees remove their protective clothing and equipment, and a clean locker room where they change back into their street clothes. Protective clothing worn by lead abatement workers must be disposed of properly. Disposable coveralls are bagged and labeled as hazardous waste and sent to an approved landfill. Cloth coveralls must be bagged, labeled, and sent to the distributor for cleaning. Employees should wash completely to remove lead dust from their skin and hair. Failure to decontaminate properly can result in employees bringing harmful lead home to their families or to others in close contact with them.
You're not the spirit. Where's the spirit? The spirit of safe practices and lead abatement. He came to me. He came over and he took me back to the job site. He showed me everything that we were doing wrong and how to protect ourselves. He showed me that we had to be trained. He showed us about the personal protective equipment. He showed us about the respirators. Oh, if only I had used the respirator. He came.